The topic of today's
Amen.
class is a pasuk in Parshas Mishpatim, which we read this Shabbos, as well as in 2 weeks from now, or 3 weeks from now, actually, because it's found again, in Parshas Kisisa. We will read it again in Elul time, because we find it again in Parshas Re'eh. And that is the pasuk about not mixing meat and milk. In the words of the pasuk, "Lo sevashel gedi b'chalev imoy," you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Rashi explains, when it says gedi, normally gedi is translated as a kid goat. Rashi says, "Lo sevashel gedi af egel v'cheves bechal gedi," a young cow and a young sheep are included in the word gedi. Gedi means a kid. Could be a kid goat, could be a kid sheep, could be a kid cow, which is what we call a calf. Shein gedi lashon vlad rach. The word gedi means a soft baby, basically, a soft child. How do we know that? Mima she'ata moitzei bekama mekoymes b'Torah shekosov gedi. In many cases, the Torah writes the word gedi. And then it says the word izim, which means a kid of the goats. Like it says by Yehuda, I will send a kid goat. As gedoye as gediizim. Again, when he sent the kid goat, it says the kid goat. Shnei gedoye ha'izim. Once again, the two kid goats, and that's when Yaakov brought for his father Yitzchok to eat kid goats, and he put the skins on himself. In all those cases, it says gediizim, a kid goat. It doesn't just say gedi, because the word gedi can mean a kid of any animal species, and only gediizim means a kid goat. And this pasuk obviously does not say gediizim, it just says a kid, so it includes any young animal. We learn whenever it says gedi stam, it includes also a young cow and a young lamb. This is written in 3 places in the Torah. One in terms of not eating, one in terms of not benefiting, and one in terms of not cooking. So even though the Torah doesn't say explicitly not to eat meat and milk, doesn't say not to get benefit from meat and milk, it doesn't even say not to cook meat and milk. It says not to cook the kid in its mother's milk. Nevertheless, based on this explanation, we are expanding it to mean any kid animal, not necessarily in its mother's milk, but in any milk. And it's not only forbidden to cook, but it's forbidden to eat and benefit too. Okay, so a few questions on this Rashi. As you have certainly noticed in this class, the Rebbe pays very close attention to every word of Rashi. Every question, every expression, every divrei hamaskil, which means when he quotes the words in the verse that he's going to explain, why does he quote some words and not other words, and so on. So here, let's start with question number 1. The pasuk that Rashi is quoting to explain is lois vashel gedi, you shall not cook a kid. So in that pasuk, first, what needs to be explained is the word sevashel, cook. After that, we have the word gedi. In fact, Rashi first explains the word gedi to explain that it's talking about all small animals, all baby animals. And only then does he get to the word sevashel, cook, and say that it means cooking and benefiting and eating. Why is it in that order? You would think first he would explain the word sevashel to mean whatever it means, and then explain the word gedi to mean whatever it means. That's question number one. Question number two is that very often Rashi, if he's explaining different concepts on a verse, even if it's the same word that he's explaining, but if he's explaining different concepts on that verse, he will quote the verse again. And he will make a separate divrei hamaschal, a separate quote, and then explain it. How much more so over here, when there are really two separate discussions here. Discussion number one is, what's the meaning of loisev ashel? Does it mean cook or does it mean other things? Question number two, what's the meaning of gedi? Does it mean a kid goat or does it mean all young animals? These are two issues. And therefore, logically, you would think that they should be in two separate divrei hamaschal. That means Rashi should first quote the part of the verse he wants to explain about cooking, what's cooking, and then the word about gedi, and so on, two separate entries, so to speak. Another question is, why does Rashi have to get into the fact that this verse is repeated 3 times? Why is that relevant for our verse? When we get to the second time it's mentioned, then we have a question. Hey, we just learned this 2 weeks ago. Why are you mentioning it again? And then we get to the third time. Wow, this is already too much. Okay, then Rashi has a right to explain it. But before we've read it the second time, we really don't have a question. Why is Rashi giving us a question that we didn't have and then giving us an answer for that question? If he could wait until we get the question when we read the second and third pasuk. What's the necessity of telling us this issue right now? Basically, Rashi is not here to just give us explanations, random Torah explanations. Rashi's purpose is pshuto shel mikra, to teach us the simple meaning of the text. And if this text is self-understood, why does Rashi have to bring in the second time, the third time, what it means? You'll get there, you'll explain it. Yes, David.
Could it be that Rashi is trying to prevent somebody from making a mistake? If the person is only learning this one time and doesn't get to the second or third time, Rashi's helping to safeguard the person, so that he's letting him know that there's 3 different types of things that he's prevented from doing.
I don't honestly know if that's Rashi's style, to be honest. In order to give that explanation, we would have to look through the Chumash and see in other instances where there are details left out of a certain mitzvah that we learn from a different place. If Rashi gives us a heads up and say, hey, don't do this or that or the other, don't think you can get away with that. We're going to see later that you can't. Does Rashi feel that that's his place and, so to speak, his obligation to tell us? Maybe he does. I honestly don't know. Something worth thinking about or investigating. Okay, finally, the last question is, the order in the Torah is important, and the order in Rashi, which is part of the Torah, is also important. Rashi says the 3 repetitions of this verse, the first one is for what? I know you're muted, but I give you permission to unmute yourself and answer the question. The first one is for what?
Cooking.
What?
Cooking.
No. That's not what Rashi
Eating.
says. The
Eating.
first one is for eating. The
Okay.
second one is for?
I
I would guess
just
cook.
looked it, I just
I would
looked
guess-
it up,
I can
on
only hear one at a time.
I'm sorry.
Anybody?
I just looked it up online. It says that milk is life and meat is death.
Okay, I'll take that. I'll take that one. Well, we can get more into that soon. That's something to think about, certainly. In terms of the 3 times repetition of this verse, Rashi says, the first one is to teach you that you can't eat it. The second one is to teach you what?
You can't benefit from it.
You can't benefit from it. Thank you very much. And the third one is to teach you can't cook it. What is going on here? The verse itself says don't cook. And you're going to tell me that the first one means don't eat? Why can't the first one mean don't cook, which is what it says? When you come to the second one, okay, we already know you can't cook. It must be forbidden something else, eating. Okay, when it comes to the third one, we already know you can't cook. You can't eat. Oh, okay, it's benefiting. But jumping right away to not eating instead of translating it in a simple sense, don't cook, which is what the verse actually says, what's going on?
Because it's meat and milk. You don't put
Yes.
meat and milk together.
Cook it or put it?
Either way.
Well, the
cannot
pasuk
have
doesn't
milk
say
with
put it.
meat.
You're saying put it. The verse doesn't say put it. The verse says cook it.
Cook, okay? So you cannot cook with the milk with meat inside. Meat
I
and
agree.
milk need to be separated.
I agree. But what's the simple meaning of the verse? When it says don't cook a kid in its mother's milk, does it mean cook or does it mean eat?
Don't cook.
Don't cook. Okay? That would be logical. But instead, Rashi says no. The first one means don't eat. The second one means don't benefit. And only the third one means don't cook. Why not say that the first one that says don't cook means don't cook? That's the more obvious interpretation of the verse, obviously. Okay, so I'm going to answer these questions as we go. First of all, let's start with the last question. Why don't we say that don't cook means don't cook? Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says after the first one means don't eat, the second one means don't benefit, then the third one means don't cook. So let's answer that question first. The answer is that in the entire Torah, we don't have even one instance where the Torah forbids cooking anything. There's no such case. So we have, of course, the fact that you cannot cook on Shabbos, but that's not really about cooking. That's about the fact that you cannot do any work, and cooking has to be a type of work. So we have many prohibitions in the Torah about eating, but none about cooking per se. And this is true once we say that the word gedi means any type of meat. In other words, if we would say that it means specifically a young goat, well, then maybe you could say, there's something about goats. We don't know what it is, but there's something about goats. And goats can't be cooked in their mother's milk. That would be if it means a goat. But now that Rashi has informed us in the first half of the Rashi, and this is the connection between the Rashis, and this is why they're in one Divrei HaMaskal, and this is why he discusses what Gedi means before he discusses the fact that one is for eating, one is for drink, for benefiting, and one is for cooking. Because now that we know this general thing about meat, it's not logical to say that it's about cooking meat and milk, at first at least. Because the Torah is giving us dietary laws, and dietary laws generally are about eating. So therefore, when it says don't cook, the way we're going to interpret it is to mean don't eat. Now, why are you saying don't cook if it really means don't eat? Very simple, because that's a manner of speech. Since cooking is what people do before they eat, so as a manner of speech, people might say don't cook it. What they really mean is don't eat it. But they use the expression of cooking because that's what people do before they eat in order to be able to eat. Now that we know that it's forbidden to cook, to eat, excuse me. Now, when the pasuk says don't cook a second time, we know there are some prohibitions that also involve benefit. We learned that from chametz, for example, where it says kol machmetzes lo yisoichelu, which means not just that you cannot eat chametz, but you cannot cause chametz to be eaten. It means you can't feed it to somebody else either, which basically means you can't benefit from it. Can't even give it to an animal. Can't give it to a non-Jew. So we see there is such a concept of not benefiting, and therefore we have an extra verse. We will divert it to not benefiting. And finally, last but not least, when you have no choice, because you've used up the first two verses for eating and benefiting, then we have no choice but to say that not cooking means actually not cooking. So that's a separate prohibition. Excuse me. Okay. So that's why the first verse is to teach you eating. Second verse is to teach you benefiting. And the third verse is to teach you cooking. Susan, yes.
Rabbi, don't you think there might have been a medical reason also
What's that?
of not mixing meat and milk?
What's wrong with milk? I've never heard a medical explanation, although if you have one to share, I'm open to it.
I thought maybe there might be a medical reason.
Susan, the meat,
Something that we don't know about.
Susan,
Yes.
the meat is fleishech. The milk is dairy. You don't mix meat and dairy at all.
Okay.
But why?
My grandparents were Orthodox Jews. I know all about Fleischer Dickett and everything. But what I'm suggesting is that there might have been something underneath all of this, not just in the Torah. There might have been something medical that we're missing.
It's not beneath the Torah to forbid things for medical reasons. I'll have you know. Because some of the commentaries say that the reason for some of the non-kosher foods is for medical reasons. That the Torah itself is concerned with our health. And that's why it says to not eat certain foods, which of course doesn't mean that we can eat them if modern medicine says it's healthy, because the mitzvahs of Hashem don't change. But as a matter of concept, some of the commentaries suggest that perhaps like the bottom dwellers in the ocean, which are they generally don't have fins and scales. Those they eat like dirty stuff. They don't have a lot of oxygen. They're just not healthy. So eating them is bad for you. And perhaps the blood also, which contains all of the stuff of the body that has to eventually be excreted and so on. It has a lot of that stuff in it that it's simply not healthy. And the same can be argued about the forbidden fats. Those probably very unhealthy for the heart, and who knows for whatever else. So there is definitely a concept like that found in the commentaries. So that's not like heretical or anything to suggest, but I have personally not seen that mentioned in the commentaries concerning meat and milk. There are many other reasons suggested, and one of them I was going to discuss today. But before we discuss that one, I'll mention the other ones. So according to the Rambam, which is Maimonides, the reason that we don't eat meat and milk is because it was an idolatrous practice to mix those foods. The Rambam connects a lot of the mitzvahs that we have no reason for, that we don't understand. He connects a lot of them to idol worship. And he says this was the custom of the idol worshipers, and we have to stay away from it. For example, why can't you tattoo yourself? What's wrong with using a tattoo? I mean, the Torah says not to, but why?
Marking God's work. You can't do that.
Well, you're allowed to pierce your ears. Your ears are also God's work. He lets you pierce your ears. I'm just saying, for argument's sake.
So where's your earring, Rabbi?
My earring. Even my wife doesn't have pierced ears. So I can't even buy her.
I don't like tattoos. I mean, it's not that I'm against other people doing it. Whatever you do is fine. I personally, I don't think, I don't want to mark my body because I'm,
Absolutely.
God, you know what I'm saying.
I'm with you 100%. The Torah forbids it. I'm just asking if there's a reason for why the Torah forbids it. According to the Rambam, the reason is that was the style of pagan worship. The pagan worshipers used to literally ink the name of their idols on their bodies, as if to say we are belonging to that god, to that idol.
Because, just like today.
Exactly. They put on their favorite pop star because that's their idol. Or their team, their sports team, or whatever other Mishigas.
Whatever Mishigas.
That's true. So the Rambam says that putting on a tattoo, or not, the prohibition of putting on a tattoo, is related to idol worship. He says the same thing, by the way, about payas. He says that the pagans used to have this hairstyle, which is not uncommon today, by the way, where they shave off the sides. And Hashem wanted us to not look like them. The same thing applies, according to the Rambam, to shatnez, wool and linen. That style of dress was done by the pagan priests, says the Rambam. So that's why we stay away from it. And finally, coming back to the meat and milk, according to the Rambam, the meat and milk was a concoction that was put together by the pagans. Hold on one second, please. Sorry, there was a concoction that was put together by the pagans. And you know how in the stories you hear about the witches who put in the toad and the snake and this root and that thing, and they had all these concoctions for their magic spells. So one of the pagan things was to cook meat and milk, and the Torah forbids us from doing that. And there's basis for that in the Torah portion itself, because right before the prohibition of meat and milk, it talks about going to the Beis Hamikdash and worshiping on the 3 pilgrimage festivals. And the understanding is, when you worship Hashem, make sure not to do it in the manner that the pagans worship. Another concept is that when we behave in certain ways here in this world, it has cosmic repercussions. What we do in our own little world changes things in the big wider world in ways that we cannot even imagine. And when we mix certain things, we could be mixing the divine energy that is the root and source of those things. So, for example, meat and milk, according to the Kabbalists, represent very different energies. Susan was saying before, life and death. Milk is life, because that's what you feed the babies. And the meat is a dead animal, so it represents death. In more Kabbalistic terms, the red meat is associated with gevura, or severity, or punishment. As the white milk, the life-giving fluid, is associated with chesed, with kindness. And mixing these can cause divine energies to mix in ways that are inappropriate and even perhaps damaging. Coming back to shatnez that we mentioned earlier, the same thing is said about shatnez. And that is that mixing wool and linen is also related to this concept, wool being related to chesed, to kindness, and linen being related to gevura.
Well, lamps also, it's with the two kids of Adam, Cain and Hevel.
Yes.
That's what the fight was about with them. And now you're mixing the two, because Cain was on one side and Hevel was on the other.
Exactly. Cain was the linen, and Hevel was the wool. He was a shepherd. That's correct. So mixing them is kind of like bringing back that old fight. Yes. Yes, David.
Yeah. In idol worship, one of the, you mentioned that it was a concoction for idol worship.
Yep.
One of the things that they worship was cruelty. So this had to do with Moloch sacrificing their children. So they used to boil the kid while it was alive in the mother's milk, which is the ultimate cruelty, to have the mother or similar experience that her child is being killed in its milk,
right,
boiled alive.
I hear you. Cruelty has to do with one of the reasons for this mitzvah that I'm going to mention soon. But you're saying that was one of the things that the pagans used to do. It could be. The Ibn Ezra actually says that it was common practice among shepherds, because when you kill a kid, a baby animal, there's got to be a lot of milk around, and that milk's not going to be needed for much longer because the baby's not going to nurse. So it's like it makes sense. It's like logical. Just use the milk of the mother to cook the baby, and it's tender and it's a good taste. And that was a common practice in those days. He doesn't relate it to idolatry per se, but it was a common practice in those days. And the issue with it, according to the Ibn Ezra, is that it's a particular act of cruelty to take a baby and cook it in the very milk that should have been giving it life. Okay, maybe it's not the actual milk of the actual mother, but it's a milk of a mother. In the very liquid that is life-giving, killing a young baby that should be drinking the milk is particularly cruel. Now, of course, you'll say, well, we're killing the baby anyway, so what difference does it make? Does the baby care? Does the baby know? It's already dead. Yeah, but conceptually, it's not right.
It's also in
cruelty.
It's also in front of the mother, so that the mother's experiencing having her child be boiled in her milk.
It's possible. It's not necessarily, but it's possible. We do have a similar concept, by the way. Who wants to get in? 786. I'll let them in, even though I don't know who they are. Okay. So, we do have other similar sins or mitzvahs that relate to cruelty with animals, for example. It's forbidden to slaughter a mother and baby on the same day. You know that? Even the father cannot be slaughtered on the same day as the baby if you know who the father is. This also has to do with cruelty, because if you do it on the same day, there's a good chance that the mother will be there while the baby is killed, or vice versa. And that's an act of particular cruelty. So, sending away the mother bird rather than have the mother bird see how the babies are taken or the chicks are taken. That's also related to cruelty. So the bottom line is, according to this opinion, we have many fences that the Torah puts up to prevent this act of cruelty. Because as we said, it applies not only to the kid in its own mother's milk, it applies to the milk of other animals, and it applies to kids. But based on the other verses that come later, we apply to any meat. So we're making all these extra fences. And of course, the rabbis add even more fences. And they say you can't eat it even if you didn't cook it together. And you have to wait 6 hours so that the taste shouldn't mix in your mouth and so on. So basically, it's a fence on a fence on a fence, all to prevent cruelty. If this is the extent that the Torah goes to prevent an act that could be seen as cruel to the animal, it's not actually cruel because the animal's dead, doesn't feel anything, but it's a conceptual cruelty. If the Torah goes so far to prevent that act of cruelty and makes all these fences, how much more so should we be extremely careful when it comes to insulting somebody, causing somebody else pain, being cruel in any way, that we should be especially careful, doubly, triply, quadruply, make extra fences, to make sure that nothing we say causes somebody pain. Okay, I have more to say, but before I do that, if anybody has any questions, now's the time. No questions.
Yeah,
All right.
Rabbi, can
Yes.
you, that conceptual cruelty, where else, how do we teach that to our children? How do we make that clear?
Good question. Invite them to this class. I don't know. Teach them Torah.
Live it.
Live it, exactly. That's the most
That really
important
is.
thing.
The only thing you can do is model. You cannot tell them words conveying whatever. You can't, because they're not listening. The time you want their hardest attention, they're not listening. But they are watching out of the corner of their eye when you make a decision to do this, so when you call this, so when you go out here, or when, and that's it. It's a natural reaction. You can't, they're saying they're now figuring out with the internet and everything, the value of data, but not just data, attention. The most valuable thing in the world is to get people's attention.
Yep.
Super Bowl, that's why commercials cost, 10 million, because everybody's focused. But they're saying in other areas, and this is what your religious feelings are competing with in terms of work or family, is, that.
Yeah, I hear you. All right. So, a little discussion that we have on this topic is the question of how Abraham served the angels meat and milk. We read about it a few months ago in the Torah portion of Vayera. Vayikach chema v'chalav uven abakar asher asa vayitein lifneihem. He took the cream and the milk that he had made and he put it, and the ben abakar, and the animal that he made, and he put it in front of them. He was standing by them, under the tree, and they ate. How did he serve them a meal that included meat and milk?
Well, one interpretation he was standing over them to make sure that they weren't mixing the meat and the milk.
Okay, I'll take that one. He was standing above them. If they made a move to take them together, he said, no, keep them separate.
He cooked them together.
Oh, no, that it doesn't say. Vayikach chema v'chalav uven habakar, separately, butter, milk, and meat, and he put it in front of them. Did they eat it together? It doesn't say.
Cold.
No, maybe they were hot, but he didn't cook them together. That it doesn't say.
Nothing about prep.
Okay, so let's take Mordechai's answer as number one, that he made sure they didn't mix it. Number two is very simple. He did it in that order. Chema, chalav, and ben abakar. First dairy, and then meat. What's the problem? You're allowed to have meat after dairy as long as you eat and drink something in between. Some wait a half hour or an hour, but that's a later custom. Originally, you could eat meat after dairy as long as you eat and drink in between. So that's what it was. They had the dairy, and then they had the meat. What do they eat in between? It doesn't say. It doesn't list all the sides. It only lists the main courses. So let's take that as answer number two. Answer number three lies in the words asher asa, uven abakar asher asa, and the calf that he had made. Here goes a little Kabbalistic explanation. Those of you that learned the Daf Yomi will come across in tomorrow's Daf that there were rabbis who could use their Kabbalistic powers to create animals. There were two rabbis who would use the book of Yetzirah, which is the book of formation, every Friday, and they would create a baby cow, and they would eat it for their Shabbos meal. Is that fleshik or is it parav? That meat. Genetically engineered meat. Is fleshik or parav? Laboratory grown meat. Fleshik or parav?
Poison.
Poison, maybe. Your grandchildren may be eating that, but it could be that it is poison, yes. We don't know yet. We'll find out in a few years. Hopefully we'll still be alive.
No such thing.
I'm sorry?
There is no such thing.
Why not?
As real? No, because it never had life in it. It's not real meat. That's the problem. They keep trying and trying, but nobody has ever created anything that ever has lived or pulsed or responded.
Who said it lives or pulsed?
I'm saying if you want real meat, that means meat through which blood has flowed through veins and capillaries, and fat has formed around bones.
My question. That's my question. Is that the definition of meat? Or can lab-grown meat also be considered meat?
I'm saying that would be my definition. It had to have once had life.
What about veggie burgers?
Veggie burgers are parv. Gesundheit. All you want.
What about an animal that was living and breathing, but it wasn't born of other animals? It was created through Kabbalistic powers. Is that parv? Or is it
I'd like to talk to those two men. Yes. I have to sit and talk to them. I don't know.
I think
according
yes.
to one of the commentaries, I think it's Rabbeinu Bechaye, the cow of Avraham was such a cow. That's why it says Uvena Bakar Asher Asa. He made it with his Kabbalistic powers. Therefore, it wasn't fleshik, and he was allowed to mix. The Gemara says in the Daf Hayomi tomorrow, in the daily page of Talmud, says in tomorrow's page, that there was a rabbi by the name of Rava, and he created a man, again, using this Sefer Yetzir, using this Kabbalistic book of formation. And he sent the man in front of a colleague of his, I think it was Rab Zera, or maybe Ula, I think it was Ula. And when Ula asked the man a question, the man could not answer intelligently. Because he looked like a man, he could act like a man, he could move like a man, but he didn't have the intelligence, didn't have the power of speech like a man. So Ula said to him, "Oh, I see you are the creation of one of my colleagues. Go back to the dust." He basically told him to cut it out and stop pretending he's a man and just go back to his dust, which is what happened. So according to some, that was the thing with Avram. Okay, and last but not least, here's a pshat from Reb Simcha Bunim of Peshischa, a Hasidic master. You all ready? Hold on to your seats for this one. We're getting into some deep halachic concepts. So there's something called Tata Govar. Tata Govar means that what's on the bottom wins. That means if there's something hot on the bottom and you pour something cold on it, halachically, the whole thing becomes hot. And therefore, if it's an improper mixture of meat and milk or whatever, the whole thing is not kosher. Whereas if the bottom is cold and the top is hot, then the bottom one wins and it cools it off. It doesn't cook. Now, there is an opinion in the Gemara that says Ila Govar, that the top one wins. And we go by the top. But that's not the halacha. The halacha is Tata Govar, the bottom one wins. Okay, so Kabbalistically, the meat represents gevura, strength, severity, punishment. So that's why after you eat meat, you must wait 6 hours, or some wait less, but majority, most people wait 6 hours. You must wait 6 hours before you can drink milk, because the bottom, what you ate first, is the meat. And if you eat the milk after that, what's on the bottom overpowers, and it becomes, you're turning the chesed into gevura. The meat overpowers the milk. And we don't want to turn chesed into gevura, kindness into strength. On the other hand, if you have dairy first, so it's on the bottom, and then you eat meat, well, the bottom one wins. And you turn the gevura into chesed. How wonderful. You turn the punishment into kindness. That's wonderful. So here's the vart, my friends. Listen carefully. What Avram did is he served them milk before meat. And this was based on the concept that Tata Ogavar, the bottom one wins, and that's okay. Like we said before. However, the angels themselves are faulted in the Medrash. It says in the Medrash that when the angels came and said to Hashem, give us the Torah, why are you giving it to the Jews? Hashem said to those angels, what do you mean? You ate milk and meat. I should give you the Torah. You didn't keep the Torah. It wasn't so long ago when you were eating meat and milk. So now what's the problem? If they ate milk before meat, that's allowed. The answer is that's only allowed if you have the perspective that the bottom is the main thing. That's the perspective of the Torah. The bottom, this world is the main thing. We have the Torah because we can transform this world and make it holy. The angels who said we want the Torah, they're saying the main thing is the Elah, is the top thing. The angels are more important. Well, if you say the angels are more important, then you sinned because you had meat after milk, and then the meat overpowered the milk and turned the chesed into gevura, and therefore your perspective is one that is that according to your very perspective, you did the wrong thing.
Tainted.
Exactly. According to your perspective, the top is the main thing. You should not have eaten in that order. So you showed that you agree with the proper perspective. The bottom one is the main thing by eating from that meal, and therefore you have no claim anymore. All right, that was a little bit Kabbalistic. I apologize. So I'll see you all next week with Hashem's help.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Anytime.
Be'ezras Hashem.
Who is
Thank you.
786-375? Who are you? Hello?
It's Andrea.
Andrea,
I
okay.
have to go.
Yep. Now we
Right,
know.
have a good Shabbos.
Have a good Shabbos, everybody. Thanks for joining.
Hi, it's Andrea.
Okay, very good. I didn't know you were. Welcome.
Well, sometimes Jay and I, we're together and sometimes we're not. So.
Okay. No worries. Whatever works. Okay. See you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Sure. Have a good Shabbos. Bye.